unearths a scary reality. The world is running out of water.
What if one of the most sacred rivers on earth is beginning to reveal what was never meant to be seen? For thousands of years, the Jordan River has existed as more than water flowing through land. It has been a boundary, a symbol, a turning point in human belief. It is the place where wandering people crossed into promise, where prophets demonstrated power, where transformation was not just metaphor, but experience. And above all, it is the river where Jesus stepped into the water and, according to the gospel accounts, heaven itself responded. In the imagination of millions, Jordan has never been just geography. It has been a threshold between what was and what could be. But something has changed. Today, when you stand along its banks, the image no longer matches the story. The water is thinner, weaker, quieter. In some stretches, it barely resembles a river at all. According to reports from EcoPeace Middle East and coverage by BBC News, more than 90% of the river's natural flow has already been diverted. What remains is not the powerful current described in ancient texts, but a reduced stream, often mixed with wastewater, salt, and agricultural runoff. It is no longer just a river losing water. It is a system losing identity. The consequences do not stop at the river itself. The Dead Sea, once sustained by the Jordan's flow, is now retreating at an alarming pace. Data referenced by NASA and National Geographic indicate that its water level is dropping by approximately 1 meter every year. Shorelines that once touched water now stretch into dry, cracked expanses of salt. Entire landscapes are being redrawn in real time. Where there was once depth, there is now exposure. Where there was once continuity, there is now fragmentation. From a scientific perspective, the explanation is direct. Water extraction, climate pressure, and regional demand have pushed the system beyond balance. The river has been overused, redirected, and reduced. The Dead Sea, deprived of its primary inflow, responds accordingly. This is not a mystery. This is cause and effect. But human perception does not stop at explanation, because when a place that has carried symbolic meaning for thousands of years begins to physically collapse, the shift feels different. It does not register only as environmental decline. It feels like something deeper is being disrupted. The Jordan River was never just associated with water. It was associated with renewal, with crossing, with beginnings. To watch it weaken is to watch a symbol lose its form. And that raises a question that cannot be measured in meters or explained by flow rates. What happens when a symbol of life begins to mirror decay? The answer does not come all at once. It begins quietly, beneath the surface, where change accumulates long before it becomes visible. As the water recedes, the land that depended on it begins to respond, not dramatically at first, not with explosions or obvious collapse, but with subtle instability, small shifts, minor fractures, the kind of changes that are easy to ignore until they are not. Because eventually, the ground begins to open. Across the Jordan Valley, a new and unsettling phenomenon has spread with increasing frequency. Sinkholes, not small depressions or gradual erosion, but sudden collapses of the earth itself. Entire sections of land giving way without warning. Roads disappearing, trees vanishing into circular voids. Solid ground replaced by emptiness in a matter of seconds. According to research from the Geological Survey of Israel, more than 6,000 sinkholes have formed in the region surrounding the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley over recent decades. The mechanism behind them is understood. As fresh water infiltrates underground layers of salt, it dissolves them. The solid foundation weakens, cavities form, and eventually, the surface above can no longer support itself. It collapses. It is a process that is entirely natural, entirely predictable under the right conditions. And yet, the experience of it is anything but ordinary. Witnesses often describe the same sequence: a faint cracking sound, a subtle vibration beneath their feet, a low, hollow rumble that seems to come from somewhere deep below. And then, without further warning, the ground drops. What was once stable becomes a void. What was once trusted becomes absent. There is something uniquely unsettling about collapse that comes from below. If something breaks from above, it can be seen. If something approaches from a distance, it can be anticipated. But when the failure begins underneath, invisible and silent, it challenges a deeper assumption. The assumption that what we stand on is secure. From a geological standpoint, sinkholes are simply the result of imbalance. Remove enough structural support and the system fails. But when this process unfolds in a place layered with historical and spiritual meaning, the interpretation begins to shift. Because the image is difficult to ignore, a land once associated with promise now reveals empty spaces beneath its surface. A ground that appeared solid now exposing hidden fragility. A landscape that held centuries of belief now physically demonstrating that what lies beneath matters more than what appears above. It is not that the science is unclear. It is that the symbolism is unavoidable. And as these collapses increase, they begin to reveal something else. Not just empty space, but what has been buried within it. Layers of sediment disturbed, hidden objects brought to light. The deeper the ground breaks, the more the past begins to surface, which leads to a shift in the story. At first, the focus is on the present, on water loss, on environmental decline, on geological instability. But once the ground opens, attention moves downward, into what has been hidden, into what time has covered. Because erosion does not just destroy, it reveals. And what it reveals is not always comfortable. Fragments of metal, corroded edges, shapes that do not belong to the natural landscape, objects that were once used, once held, once part of human action, emerging not because someone chose to uncover them, but because the land itself is no longer able to keep them hidden. The implication is subtle, but powerful. When the surface breaks, the past does not stay buried. And if that is true for a landscape, it raises a question that extends far beyond geography. What else remains beneath the surface? Waiting for the moment when the structure above it can no longer hold. As the ground continues to fracture and the surface loses its ability to conceal what lies beneath, another shift begins to take shape. The story is no longer only about collapse. It becomes about revelation. Because when the land opens, it does not reveal emptiness alone. It reveals memory. Archaeologists working along sections of the exposed riverbed have reported the emergence of objects that do not belong to the present. Corroded spearheads, fragments of iron blades, broken remnants of weapons that were once shaped, held, and used by human hands. Through material analysis and stylistic comparison, some of these artifacts have been linked to periods associated with ancient Israelite history and later Roman presence in the region, findings that align with documented patterns studied by the Israel Antiquities Authority. These are not decorative items or symbolic carvings. They are instruments of conflict, shaped for force, designed with purpose, and now returning to the surface after centuries of silence. What makes their reappearance striking is not only their age, but their location. These objects are not being uncovered in a distant battlefield or an isolated ruin. They are emerging from beneath a river that has long been associated with purification, renewal, and transformation. A place where people entered the water to leave something behind now reveals what was once used to harm, to defend, to fight. The contrast is immediate and difficult to ignore. The same ground that carried meaning as a threshold into new life is now exposing the physical remains of violence. This creates a tension that cannot be resolved by archaeology alone, because the question is no longer limited to who used these weapons or when they were lost. The deeper question is why they feel significant now. Their presence suggests that beneath even the most powerful symbols of renewal, there can exist layers of unresolved history. Conflict does not always disappear. Sometimes it is buried, preserved not by intention, but by time. And when conditions change, it returns. The sequence itself becomes part of the meaning. First, the water recedes, then the ground destabilizes, then the past begins to surface. It is not a random order. It follows a pattern in which removal leads to exposure. And once exposure begins, it does not stop with one category of objects, because soon after these remnants of war appear, something very different begins to emerge alongside them. Divers and field researchers have described the discovery of structures and objects that carry a completely different kind of weight. Stone crosses resting beneath layers of sediment, fragments of what appear to be early Christian sites, and most notably, a crafted vessel, a golden chalice marked with faint inscriptions in ancient languages. Words interpreted to mean covenant, blood, and kingdom, terms that carry not just historical meaning, but theological depth. According to preliminary interpretations, the chalice could date back to the period associated with the Second Temple era, though no definitive conclusion has been reached. From a scientific standpoint, it may simply be a ritual object, one of many that have been lost, displaced, and preserved through natural processes over time. The region has a long and complex history of religious activity, and such findings are not without precedent. But again, the significance does not come from the object alone. It comes from when and where it appears, because now the pattern becomes more complex. The same environment that reveals weapons of war begins to reveal symbols of faith. The same fractures that expose conflict also uncover objects tied to covenant and belief. And when these discoveries are placed side by side, a sequence begins to form that feels almost narrative in structure. First, instruments of violence rise from the ground. Then, symbols associated with reconciliation and promise follow. It is not necessary to claim intention to recognize patterns. Human perception is naturally drawn to order, especially when events unfold in a way that feels structured. The mind begins to ask whether this is coincidence or convergence, whether these objects are simply being revealed by erosion, or whether their appearance in this particular sequence reflects something deeper about how history is layered, because history is rarely linear. It does not move in a straight line from past to present. It accumulates, compresses, and settles into layers. And under normal conditions, those layers remain hidden. But when the system that holds them in place begins to fail, they do not emerge randomly. They emerge in fragments that reflect different aspects of what has been. Conflict, belief, struggle, covenant, all present in the same ground, all revealed by the same process. And this convergence leads to a realization that extends beyond archaeology or geology. It suggests that places are not defined only by what they represent at the surface, but also by what they contain beneath it. A river may symbolize renewal, but that does not erase what came before. A landscape may carry spiritual meaning, but it also carries physical history. The deeper implication is not that the past is returning. It is that it was never gone. It remained intact and silent, waiting for the moment when the conditions above could no longer contain it. And now that moment has arrived, not through deliberate excavation, but through systemic change, through water loss, structural instability, and the gradual removal of what once covered everything. which leads to a question that becomes harder to ignore with each new discovery. If the ground beneath one of the most symbolically significant places in human history can hold both the tools of war and the symbols of covenant at the same time, what does that say about the nature of the stories we tell ourselves? Are we looking at a sequence of unrelated findings, each with its own explanation, its own context, its own timeline? Or are we witnessing something more unsettling? A layered narrative, not written in words, but in objects. Not arranged by human design, but revealed by natural process. A narrative in which conflict and redemption are not separate chapters, but overlapping realities. And if that is true, then the meaning of what is being uncovered may not lie in the objects themselves. It may lie in the order in which they are appearing. As the physical landscape continues to shift and buried history rises into view, another layer of change begins to unfold. One that does not come from stone or metal, but from life itself. The ecosystem surrounding the river, once sustained by a relatively stable flow of water, begins to respond in ways that feel subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. These are not dramatic collapses or visible fractures, but behavioral changes, biological signals that something within the system is no longer balanced. Observers along the riverbanks have reported unusual concentrations of amphibians, particularly frogs gathering in dense clusters along shrinking stretches of viable habitat. Instead of dispersing naturally across wetlands and vegetation, they appear compressed into narrower zones, their presence overlapping, their calls blending into a continuous, almost overwhelming soundscape. From a biological perspective, this behavior is not without explanation. Amphibians are highly sensitive to environmental changes. Fluctuations in water levels, shifts in temperature, and alterations in chemical composition can force rapid migration. When their habitat contracts, they do not disappear. They concentrate. At the same time, another phenomenon has been intermittently observed. Sections of the river have taken on a reddish tint, not the gradual discoloration of sediment, but a noticeable shift in color that appears, lingers briefly, and then fades. Scientists have proposed several explanations. Algal blooms, particularly those involving pigmented microorganisms, can alter the appearance of water under certain conditions. Mineral reactions, especially in regions rich in salts and reactive compounds, can also produce temporary color changes when exposed to variations in oxygen, temperature, or flow. In many cases, these explanations are sufficient. In others, they remain incomplete, requiring further observation before a definitive conclusion can be reached. Individually, neither phenomenon is extraordinary. Animal clustering under environmental stress is well documented. Temporary discoloration of water has been observed in ecosystems around the world. Each event, taken on its own, fits within known scientific frameworks. Each has precedent. Each can be studied, measured, and understood within the boundaries of biology and chemistry. But the situation changes when these events are no longer isolated, because what is being observed is not just a single anomaly, but a sequence. Habitat disruption followed by animal concentration, water instability followed by visible transformation. Each step connected by underlying environmental shifts, yet unfolding in a way that feels ordered rather than random. The human mind, shaped by pattern recognition, begins to link these moments together, not because it seeks to exaggerate, but because it is wired to detect structure when events align in time and space. This is where perception begins to diverge from explanation. Science addresses causes. It explains why amphibians gather, why water changes color, why ecosystems react under pressure. But perception responds to patterns. It asks why these things are happening here and why they are happening now, and why they seem to be unfolding in a sequence that mirrors something larger than any single event. The discomfort does not come from the frogs. It does not come from the color of the water. It comes from the accumulation, from the realization that multiple independent systems are responding simultaneously to a shared disturbance. From the sense that what is being observed is not a single reaction, but a layered response. And layered responses suggest systems under strain. When one variable changes, one system adapts. When multiple variables shift at once, multiple systems begin to react. Water chemistry changes. Habitat boundaries shrink. Species redistribute. Visual anomalies appear. None of this is supernatural. None of this violates known laws. But together, they create something that feels more complex than the sum of its parts. Because patterns carry weight. They suggest direction. They imply progression. And when a pattern begins to emerge in a place already defined by historical and symbolic meaning, its impact is amplified. The same events occurring in a neutral environment might pass without notice. But here, context transforms interpretation. The river is not just water. It is a memory. It is a narrative. It is an expectation. So when changes occur within it, they are not observed in isolation. They are interpreted in relation to what the river represents. This is why the unease grows. Not because the events are inexplicable, but because they are connected. Not because they are unprecedented, but because they are converging. The system is not breaking in one place. It is responding across multiple levels at once. Geological, historical, biological, and now ecological, which leads to a subtle but important shift in understanding. The question is no longer whether each individual phenomenon can be explained. It is whether the overall pattern they form carries meaning beyond explanation. Because once events begin to align, the focus changes. It moves away from what is happening and toward how it is happening. And that is where uncertainty begins to take shape. As environmental shifts continue to ripple through the landscape and biological responses begin to form recognizable patterns, the narrative takes another turn. One that moves beyond measurable data and into the realm of human experience. Not everything being reported can be collected, tested, or reproduced. Some of it exists only in observation, in memory, and in the consistency of accounts shared by those who claim to have witnessed something unusual along the river. One of the most widely discussed sightings involves a large crocodile moving through the current, its body cutting across the surface in a place where such a creature does not typically belong. From a biological standpoint, the explanation is straightforward. Animals can migrate, be displaced, or appear outside their expected range due to environmental disruption. Changes in water systems can redirect movement patterns, forcing species into unfamiliar territories. But the reaction to this sighting has extended beyond ecology. The presence of a powerful predator in a river so deeply associated with spiritual symbolism introduces a layer of interpretation that goes beyond classification. It becomes less about what the animal is and more about what it represents within that setting. Not long after, reports began to circulate of a luminous figure appearing above the river at dusk. Witnesses described a concentrated light, structured in a way that resembled wings, pulsing and fading before reappearing in intervals. Some observers pointed toward atmospheric explanations, suggesting plasma discharge, light refraction, or reflections interacting with thin cloud layers. Others proposed more grounded causes, such as distant artificial light sources distorted by environmental conditions. Yet for those who stood beneath it, the experience did not feel mechanical. It felt intentional, shaped, almost as if the light carried form rather than randomness. Alongside these visual accounts, there have also been auditory reports. Sounds emerging from the river that do not resemble typical water movement or wind interaction. Low resonant tones, distant rumbling, sometimes described as prolonged, almost trumpet-like vibrations echoing across the surface. Geological studies provide possible explanations. The region lies along an active tectonic boundary, and shifts within the Earth's crust can produce vibrations that travel through both ground and water. The release of trapped gases beneath sediment layers can also generate unusual acoustic effects. These mechanisms are documented, measurable, and consistent with known behavior in fault-line environments. And yet, the reports do not stop there. Some witnesses have described seeing large, shadowy figures moving along the riverbanks at night. Shapes that appear too large to be human, silhouettes that shift and disappear, leaving behind impressions that are difficult to verify, but equally difficult to dismiss entirely due to the number of similar accounts. Skeptical interpretations suggest optical illusions, the distortion of scale in low light, or the human tendency to project form onto incomplete visual information. In darkness, the brain fills gaps, constructing figures from fragments. It is a process well understood in cognitive science. Individually, each of these phenomena can be approached with a rational framework. Animal displacement explains the crocodile. Atmospheric physics accounts for unusual light formations. Geology and gas dynamics clarify the sounds. Visual perception explains shadow distortions. None of these require assumptions beyond what is already known. None of them exist outside the boundaries of established science. But the complexity emerges when they are considered together, because these are not isolated reports occurring across unrelated regions. They are being described within the same geographical space, within a relatively narrow time frame, layered on top of environmental change, geological instability, and archaeological revelation. The context in which they appear becomes as important as the phenomena themselves. This is where explanation begins to reach its limit, not because science fails, but because it is not designed to address convergence in the way human perception experiences it. Science separates variables. It isolates causes. It examines each event within its own domain. But human awareness integrates. It connects. It places events side by side and looks for continuity. And when continuity appears, even if it is constructed through proximity rather than causation, it begins to shape meaning. The shared characteristic across all these reports is not mystery in the sense of the unknown. It is incomplete in the sense of the whole. Each piece fits somewhere. Each has a place within an explanatory system. But no single framework accounts for all of them at once when they are viewed as part of a single unfolding sequence. This creates a tension that is difficult to resolve, because the mind is left holding two simultaneous truths. On one side, every phenomenon has a plausible explanation. On the other, the accumulation of those phenomena within one context produces a pattern that feels larger than any explanation on its own. And it is within that tension that interpretation begins to expand, not necessarily toward conclusions, but toward questions. Questions about coincidence, about convergence, about whether independent systems can align purely by chance, or whether alignment itself becomes a form of signal. At this point, the narrative is no longer driven by what is happening in isolation. It is driven by how multiple layers of reality are interacting at the same time. Physical, biological, perceptual, and symbolic. As these layers of events continue to accumulate and overlap, the focus naturally shifts from what is happening to how we understand what is happening. This is where the narrative reaches its most critical point, not in terms of evidence or observation, but in terms of interpretation. Because up to this moment, every phenomenon has remained within the boundaries of explanation. Nothing has violated known laws. Nothing has required abandoning established knowledge. And yet, the experience of witnessing all of it together creates a different kind of tension, one that does not come from lack of answers, but from the way those answers exist side by side. Science operates by separation. It isolates variables, examines causes, and builds understanding through precision. Geological processes explain the formation of sinkholes as structural responses to subsurface change. Biological systems account for shifts in animal behavior when habitats are disrupted. Chemical reactions clarify how water can change color under specific environmental conditions. Archaeology reconstructs timelines through artifacts, placing objects within historical frameworks based on material and context. Each field functions independently, and within its own domain, each provides clarity. But human perception does not operate in isolation. When events occur in proximity, both in space and in time, the mind does not naturally divide them into categories. It connects them. It searches for continuity, for sequence, for relationship. This is not a flaw in reasoning. It is a fundamental feature of cognition. Pattern recognition is how humans make sense of complexity. It is how scattered information becomes narrative, how separate data points become something that feels coherent. And in a place like this, where the environment is already layered with meaning, that process becomes even more pronounced. Because the Jordan River is not perceived as a neutral location. It carries historical weight. It holds symbolic value that has been reinforced over generations. When multiple unusual phenomena appear within such a setting, they are not interpreted in a vacuum. They are filtered through expectation, memory, and belief. The same events, occurring in a different location, might be processed as unrelated. Here, they feel connected almost immediately. This is the point where the boundary begins to shift, not because science becomes invalid, but because its scope is different. Science answers how. It identifies mechanisms, processes, and causes. But it does not assign meaning. It does not determine whether a sequence of events carries significance beyond its components. That space is occupied by interpretation, by the human tendency to ask not just what is happening, but why it matters. And when enough elements align, interpretation becomes almost unavoidable. The emergence of patterns does not require intention to feel real. It only requires alignment. When geological instability coincides with archaeological exposure, when biological behavior shifts alongside environmental change, when visual and auditory anomalies appear within the same context, the mind begins to organize these inputs into something larger than coincidence. It constructs a framework that links them, even if those links are not physically causal. This is where clarity becomes more difficult. Because two different systems of understanding begin to operate simultaneously. One system continues to analyze each phenomenon on its own terms, maintaining logical separation and grounded explanation. The other system begins to integrate those phenomena into a broader narrative, searching for coherence across categories that were never meant to be combined. Neither system is inherently wrong. One provides accuracy, the other provides meaning. The challenge arises when the distinction between them starts to blur. When explanation begins to feel incomplete, not because it lacks detail, but because it does not address the experience of convergence. And when interpretation begins to feel convincing, not because it is proven, but because it aligns with the way the events are perceived collectively. At this point, the question is no longer about whether each event can be explained. That has already been established. The question becomes whether explanation alone is sufficient to account for the way these events are being experienced as a whole. Because there is a difference between understanding parts and understanding patterns. And it is within that difference that uncertainty grows. Not the uncertainty of ignorance, but the uncertainty of interpretation. The awareness that multiple valid explanations can coexist with a sense of something unresolved. The recognition that knowledge does not always eliminate ambiguity, especially when that knowledge is distributed across separate domains. This is the space where the boundary between science and interpretation does not disappear. but becomes increasingly difficult to define. And once that boundary becomes unclear, the narrative changes again. It moves away from individual events, away from isolated explanations, and towards something broader. Something that does not belong entirely to science and not entirely to belief, but exists somewhere in between. As all of these layers begin to align, a broader structure slowly comes into view. One that is less about individual events and more about the system that connects them. When examined separately, each change appears manageable, explainable, even predictable. But when placed within a longer timeline, a different pattern emerges. One that does not depend on sudden causes, but on gradual accumulation. What is unfolding is not a series of isolated disruptions, but the visible phase of a process that has been building quietly for decades. Environmental decline rarely announces itself in dramatic ways at the beginning. It starts with small shifts that are easy to overlook. Slight reductions in water flow, minor chemical imbalances, subtle alterations in temperature and seasonal cycles. None of these changes are immediately catastrophic. In fact, they often remain within ranges that ecosystems can temporarily absorb. But systems are not infinite. They operate within thresholds, and as pressure continues to build, those thresholds begin to approach their limits. In the case of the Jordan River and its surrounding region, the sequence becomes clearer when viewed across time rather than in isolated moments. The reduction of water flow did not occur overnight. It developed gradually through diversion, consumption, and long-term environmental stress. As the water level declined, the stability of the underlying geological structures began to weaken. Not instantly, but incrementally. Salt layers dissolved slowly, cavities formed beneath the surface without immediate collapse. The landscape held together even as its internal integrity diminished. This is the nature of delayed response in complex systems. For long periods, change remains hidden because the system still appears functional from the outside. The surface holds. The structure maintains its form. But beneath that appearance, internal stress continues to accumulate. And then, at a certain point, the system reaches a threshold where it can no longer compensate. That threshold does not announce itself in advance. It reveals itself only when it is crossed. At that moment, the pace of change accelerates dramatically. What once took years to develop begins to manifest in days or even seconds. Sinkholes appear suddenly because the cavities that caused them have been forming for years. Artifacts emerge because the layers that concealed them have been eroding over long periods. Biological systems react quickly because they have already been adapting under stress conditions that were building over time. The appearance of simultaneity is not the result of sudden cause. It is the result of accumulated pressure reaching a visible point. This is what scientists refer to as a tipping point. According to assessments highlighted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, complex environmental systems often do not change in a linear way. Instead, they remain relatively stable until a critical threshold is reached, after which even small additional changes can trigger rapid and sometimes irreversible transformations. These tipping points are not anomalies. They are inherent features of systems that are pushed beyond their capacity to adapt. When viewed through this lens, the convergence of events along the Jordan River begins to take on a different meaning. It is not that multiple unrelated phenomena are suddenly occurring at the same time. It is that multiple systems have reached their thresholds within a similar time frame. The geological, ecological, and environmental layers are not interacting randomly. They are responding collectively to long-term pressure that has now become impossible to contain. This reframes the perception of what is happening. The sense that everything is occurring at once is not an illusion, but it is also not entirely accurate. What is being observed is the visible phase of processes that have been unfolding silently for years, even decades. The suddenness belongs to the moment of exposure, not to the origin of the change. The causes are not new, only their visibility is. And visibility changes interpretation. When processes remain hidden, they are rarely perceived as urgent. When they become visible, they demand attention. The human mind is particularly sensitive to abrupt change, even when that change is the result of long-term accumulation. It interprets sudden visibility as sudden cause, even when the timeline tells a different story. This is why the current moment feels intensified, not because the system has just begun to change, but because it has reached the point where its changes can no longer remain concealed. The ground opens, the past surfaces, the ecosystem shifts, and perceptual anomalies gain attention. Each layer reflects the same underlying reality, that the system has moved beyond a state of equilibrium. And once a tipping point is crossed, reversal becomes increasingly difficult. Not impossible in every case, but limited. Because the system has already reorganized itself under new conditions. Structures that once existed no longer hold. Processes that were once stable no longer operate in the same way. The trajectory has changed, and returning to a previous state requires more than simply reversing the initial cause. It requires rebuilding the system itself. This is the deeper implication of what is unfolding. Not that a single event has disrupted the river, but that the river and its surrounding systems have collectively transitioned into a different phase. A phase where change is no longer gradual, but visible. No longer hidden, but expressed. And when multiple layers of reality begin to express change at the same time, the experience of it becomes more than scientific. It becomes interpretive, because at this point, the question naturally expands. It is no longer limited to how the system reached this state. It begins to include what this state represents. All of the observations, the environmental decline, the geological instability, the resurfacing of history, the biological responses, and the perceptual reports can be approached through two distinct but overlapping perspectives. One perspective views them as the outcome of natural processes interacting within a complex system. Each element follows from known mechanisms. Each change can be traced, analyzed, and understood within scientific frameworks. From this view, the narrative is one of cause, effect, and consequence. The other perspective does not reject these explanations, but places them within a broader context of meaning. It recognizes that humans do not experience reality as a collection of separate systems. We experience it as a unified environment where events acquire significance through their relationships to each other. When multiple changes converge within a location already associated with deep symbolic history, interpretation extends beyond mechanism. It begins to consider whether the convergence itself carries meaning. Neither perspective invalidates the other. They operate on different levels. One explains how things happen. The other asks what those happenings might mean within a larger human context. And it is within the coexistence of these perspectives that the final question emerges. Perhaps the most important shift is not occurring in the river itself, but in the way it is being perceived. The physical changes are measurable. The environmental data is observable. The geological processes are documented. But the interpretation of those changes depends on the framework through which they are viewed. If a river once defined by renewal begins to expose decay, it challenges more than environmental assumptions. It challenges symbolic expectations. It forces a reconsideration of what the river represents, not only in the past, but in the present. And that reconsideration leads to a deeper realization. The question is no longer confined to the condition of the river. It extends to the observer. Are these events simply natural processes reaching visibility after years of accumulation, each one explainable, each one part of a system responding to pressure? Or are they something more? A convergence that feels structured not because it was designed, but because it reflects patterns that humans are conditioned to recognize. A sequence that appears meaningful not because it carries intention, but because it aligns with the way we construct meaning from complexity. The distinction is subtle, but it matters, because it determines how the entire situation is understood. If everything is viewed purely through scientific explanation, the narrative remains grounded in process and consequence. If everything is viewed through symbolic interpretation, the narrative expands into questions of significance and implication. But what happens when both perspectives are held at the same time? When explanation does not eliminate meaning, and meaning does not replace explanation? That is where uncertainty transforms into awareness. Not the awareness of a single answer, but of multiple possibilities existing simultaneously. And within that space, one final question remains. When you look at what is happening along the Jordan River, when you consider the patterns, the timing, the convergence of events, are you seeing a system under stress, revealing its internal processes, or are you witnessing something that feels like a message? Not because it was intended as one, but because it reflects a deeper structure we are only beginning to understand. The answer may not lie in choosing one interpretation over the other. It may lie in recognizing that the line between them is thinner than it appears, and that what we are truly observing is not just a changing river, but a moment where reality itself feels open to interpretation. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video even a little interesting, I would truly appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching until the end.